Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The laughter was the first thing Cale noticed, a sound as sharp and grating as the crystalline dust that scoured the surface of Xylos. It echoed from the prefabricated cantina of Reclamation Yard 7, a tinny chorus of derision from corporate prospectors and haulers in their sleek, grav-lifted rigs. They were laughing at him, and at the Iron Mule. His truck was an archaic beast, a relic of a bygone century, all combustion engine and articulated steel. Its tires, thick with reinforced polymers, were a joke on a world where everything floated on null-gravity fields. Its rust-streaked chassis was an insult to the sterile chrome and white composites of the Xylos Corporation. To them, it was a fossil, and he was the fool who drove it. Cale ignored them. He had learned long ago that the opinions of men who measured their worth in corporate scrip were as valuable as the dust under his fingernails. He leaned against the mule's massive fender, the metal warm beneath his palm from the relentless glare of the planet's twin suns. He was a reclaimer, a bottom feeder in the corporate food chain, contracted to haul away the slag and detritus from the company's massive strip mining operations. It was a job for the desperate or the stubborn, and Cale was a measure of both. His past was a quiet weight in his bones, a history written in scars and discipline that the soft men in the cantina could never comprehend. He had once been a corporate enforcer, a tool of the very system he now skirted the edges of, and he knew its language of casual cruelty better than most. A klaxon blared, a flat, ugly sound that cut through the thin atmosphere. It signaled a new deposit, a fresh wound torn in the planet's crust. Cale pushed himself off the truck, his movements economical and deliberate. The laughter from the cantina died down as men scrambled for their rigs, eager to stake their claims. He, however, had a different assignment. His datapad chimed with a low-priority directive: slag removal at excavation site Delta, deep in the heart of the company's territory. He grunted, swung himself up into the cab of the mule, and felt the familiar groan of the engine turning over. It was a deep, guttural roar that vibrated through the deck plates, a sound of honest power in a world of silent, antiseptic efficiency. The drive to Site Delta took him across the glass sea, a shimmering plain of silicate fragments that glittered under the binary suns. The mule's heavy tires crunched over the terrain, leaving deep ruts where the grav skimmers left no trace. Cale navigated by instinct and memory, his eyes scanning the horizon for the towering silhouette of the excavation machinery. The air inside the cab was thick with the smell of ozone and hot oil, a scent he found more comforting than the recycled air of the corporate habitats. He was a man out of time, clinging to the tangible and the real in an age of illusion and artifice. Site Delta was a fresh scar, a gaping pit surrounded by towering floodlights and seismic drills. At its center, cordoned off by high-energy containment fields, was the reason for the klaxon. It was not a vein of common trillium or a pocket of energon crystals. It was something else entirely. Cale parked the mule at the designated perimeter and stepped out, the heat hitting him like a physical blow. Corporate technicians in sterile white environment suits scurried about, their voices clipped and excited over the local comms. Cale's access codes only granted him clearance to the refuse perimeter, but he could see the find clearly. It was a figure, humanoid in shape but composed of a dark, semi-translucent crystal that seemed to drink the light. It was tall and slender, its limbs long and elegant, held immobile in the crackling blue energy of the containment field. Cale had seen geodes before, but only as inert fragments sold as exotic curiosities. He had never seen one whole, let alone one that seemed, even in its stasis, so profoundly alive. The company classified them as unique geological formations, incredibly valuable, but fundamentally inanimate. Yet, as he watched, he saw a faint, slow pulse of light deep within its chest. His job was to load the discarded rock and slag, the worthless byproducts of the extraction. But he found his gaze drawn back to the captive figure. The technicians were treating it like an object, running scans, and preparing cutting lasers to break it down into manageable, transportable pieces. He saw the project's supervisor, a man named Rorik whom Cale knew from his past, barking orders with a familiar, predatory glee. Rorik was a zealous company man, a jackal who had risen through the ranks on the failures of others. Kale went about his work, the hydraulic crane on the mule's flatbed groaning as it lifted tons of shattered rock. But he watched. He saw that the crystalline being, though held fast, seemed to sag, its inner light growing dimmer. The air around the pit was unnaturally dry, the mining lasers having boiled away any residual moisture. He saw fine fractures, almost invisible, spreading across the being's surface like a pane of glass about to shatter. The corporation saw a resource. Kale, for a reason he could not articulate, saw something in pain. The thought was an anomaly, a flicker of sentiment he had thought long extinguished. His code was survival. Get the job done, get paid, stay invisible. Attachments were liabilities. Compassion was a fatal flaw. He had lived by that code for 10 years, ever since he had walked away from the enforcers with nothing but his life and the clothes on his back. But the image of the slow fading light and the spreading cracks stuck with him. It reminded him of something, a distant memory of a world with rain and growing things. It was an impulse, illogical and dangerous. The work crew broke for a hydration cycle, retreating to a pressurized tent. The site was quiet, save for the hum of the containment field. Rorik was gone, likely back to the command center to gloat. Kale looked at the mule. Tucked away in a side compartment was his emergency water ration, a full 5-liter canister of purified, nutrient-rich water. It was worth more than a day's pay on this desiccated world. Acting before the cold logic of survival could reassert itself, he walked toward the pit. He moved with a quiet confidence that did not attract attention, the gait of a man who belonged in places he was not supposed to be. He bypassed the low-level perimeter fence easily, his old enforcer codes still granting him access to maintenance panels the technicians overlooked. He stood before the containment field, the air buzzing with energy. The crystalline figure was just meters away. Its head was bowed, its form radiating a palpable sense of exhaustion. He saw the control panel for the field's atmospheric regulators. A few deft commands, a feigned system diagnostic, and a small service hatch slid open at the base of the projector. It was just large enough. He uncapped the canister and poured the water through the opening. It vaporized almost instantly in the focused energy, but not before a thick cloud of nutrient-rich steam billowed around the figure's feet. For a moment, nothing happened. Kale felt a surge of foolishness, the bitter taste of a wasted gesture. Then, the being stirred. Its head lifted slowly. The faint light in its chest flared, not with a sudden brilliance, but with a deep, resonant pulse. The fine cracks on its surface seemed to seal themselves, the dark crystal taking on a liquid sheen. It raised one of its hands, a gesture of impossible grace, and touched the inside of the containment field. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The blue field erupted in a shower of white sparks. Alarms screamed across the entire site, a cacophony of urgent, overlapping warnings. The main power conduit feeding the field overloaded with a deafening bang, plunging the pit into the dim, natural light of the twin suns. The containment field flickered, warped, and died. The crystalline being stood untethered, the light within it now a steady, formidable glow. It turned its head, its featureless face fixing on Kale. There was no malice in its gaze, only a profound and ancient intelligence. Kale knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had just broken the most fundamental rule of his solitary existence. He had interfered. The systemic reaction was immediate. Floodlights snapped back on, pinning him in their glare. Over the comm system, Rorik's voice roared, stripped of its smugness and filled with cold fury. Lock down the site. All units to Delta. Subdue the asset. I want the reclaimer now. Kale did not hesitate. His body moved with the muscle memory of 100 forgotten firefights. He was already sprinting back towards the Iron Mule before the first corporate security skimmer lifted off from the main compound. He vaulted into the cab, the engine roaring to life under his practiced hand. In his rearview mirror, he saw the crystalline being take a step, then another, moving with a fluid power that belied its solid form. It seemed to follow him, drawn to the man who had offered it a sip of water. He had no plan. There was only the primal instinct to flee. He slammed the mule into gear, the massive truck lurching forward, its tires spewing clouds of silicate dust. Skimmers, sleek and predatory, were already streaking across the sky towards him. Warning shots of plasma scorched the earth around the truck, kicking up molten glass. A new directive flashed on his datapad, overriding all others. It was a kill order. His name is ident code, and the word, terminate. The corporation was not in the habit of leaving loose ends. He had seen a priceless asset escape, and he had been the cause. There would be no trial. He pushed the mule to its limit, the ancient engine screaming in protest as he redlined the gauges. He swerved around slag heaps and abandoned machinery, the lumbering truck a surprisingly agile beast in his hands. But the skimmers were faster. They flanked him, their weapon ports glowing. Suddenly, the cab door on the passenger side was wrenched open. The crystalline being flowed inside, folding its long limbs into the cramped space with an unnatural grace. It did not speak, but Cale felt a strange sense of calm emanating from it, a quiet hum that seemed to resonate in the very steel of the truck. He risked a glance. Its form was shimmering, the light within it pulsing in time with the thrum of the engine. A plasma bolt struck the mule's flatbed, peeling back a sheet of armored plating like a can opener. The truck shuddered violently. Cale fought the wheel, his knuckles white. They were cornered. A narrow canyon pass lay ahead, but Rorik's lead skimmer was moving to cut him off. Nowhere to run, Reclaimer. Rorik's voice crackled over the open channel, laced with triumph. You and your pet rock are corporate property. The skimmer leveled its main cannon. Cale braced for the impact, a bitter curse on his lips. This was the end he had always expected, a stupid death on a forgotten rock for a moment of inexplicable sentiment. The being beside him reached out, placing a slender, crystalline hand flat against the dashboard. The interior of the cab filled with a low, harmonic chime. Cale felt a deep vibration run through the truck, not from the engine, but from the ground beneath them. Outside, the world seemed to warp. A thick wall of jagged, dark crystal erupted from the canyon floor, rising like a titan's shield directly in the path of the plasma blast. The bolt impacted the makeshift wall with a blinding flash. The crystal held, glowing incandescently for a moment before the energy dissipated. The skimmer, caught off guard, had to swerve violently to avoid a collision. Cale stared, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. The being hadn't just summoned a wall. It had commanded the very substance of the planet to rise and defend them. He didn't need any more convincing. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, steering the mule through the gap before the other skimmers could react. This was no longer just an escape. It was an alliance, forged in desperation and an act of impossible power. The being beside him was not a pet rock. It was a weapon, an ally, a key to something he could not yet comprehend. As they raced through the canyon, the mockery he had endured that morning came back to him. They had laughed at his old truck. He looked at the reinforced steel frame, the heavy-duty suspension he had painstakingly maintained, the analog systems that were immune to the corporation's electronic warfare. He looked at the powerful, silent figure beside him. A grim smile touched his lips for the first time in years. By noon, the Iron Mule was no longer just a truck. It was a mobile fortress, and the war for Xylos had just begun. The initial dynamic was one of wary observation. Cale drove, his senses on high alert, his mind racing to recalibrate his understanding of the universe. The being, which he had begun to think of as Lyra for the silent, song-like quality of the hum that now filled the cab, remained still. It watched the passing landscape of shattered crystal and rust-colored mesas, its featureless face betraying nothing. The alliance was unspoken, a pact of mutual necessity. He was her mobility, she was his shield. Rorik's pursuit was relentless. New squadrons of skimmers appeared over the ridges, faster and more heavily armed. Cale knew the corporate playbook. They would use overwhelming force, a sledgehammer to crack a nut, simply to make an example of him. He pushed the mule deeper into the Badlands, a labyrinth of canyons and ravines known on corporate charts as the Shatter. It was a place where gravlift sensors were unreliable, where the planet's magnetic fields played havoc with advanced navigation systems. It was a place for a machine that relied on gears and grit. She can't keep doing that, he muttered, more to himself than to his passenger. The massive crystal wall had been an incredible display, but he had seen the light within her flicker and dim afterward. She was powerful, but not inexhaustible. She was vulnerable. As if in response, she turned her head toward him. He felt a gentle pressure in his mind, not words, but a wave of images and feelings. He saw the water he had poured, a sensation of profound relief, of life-giving coolness. Then he saw the mining lasers, a feeling of searing, agonizing pain. He understood. Her power was tied to the planet, but her own form was a vessel, and it could be broken. A proximity alert shrieked from his console. A trio of Stinger-class interceptors was closing fast from behind, flying low and using the canyon walls for cover. They were military-grade, far more dangerous than the standard security skimmers. Voss, the regional director, must have authorized lethal force from his orbital platform. Hold on, Kale grunted, yanking the wheel hard to the right. The mule skidded, its tires screaming as it scraped against a rock face, sending a shower of sparks into the air. He steered them into a narrower side canyon, a passage barely wider than the truck itself. The Stingers wouldn't be able to follow in formation. One of the pilots was reckless, however. It broke off and came after them, its engines whining as it navigated the tight space. Kale watched it in his side mirror, a wasp chasing a beetle. Its forward cannons began to glow. There was no room to evade. Before he could even contemplate their odds, Lyra acted again. She did not create another wall. Instead, she pressed her hand to the side window of the cab. The rock face beside them seemed to liquefy. A thick, jagged spear of crystal, the length of a small shuttle, detached from the canyon wall and shot sideways with impossible speed. It impaled the Stinger through its cockpit, silencing its engines instantly. The interceptor, pinned to the opposite wall, exploded in a ball of orange and black fire. The shockwave buffeted the mule, but Kale kept it steady. He glanced at Lyra. The light within her was fainter now, her posture slumped. The effort had cost her dearly. This was the first concrete act of mutual protection. She had saved him, saved the truck, without hesitation. He felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation settle in his chest. It was the ghost of loyalty, a feeling he thought he had buried with his former life. He had started this by offering her water. She had repaid him by saving his life. The scales were balanced. Now it was his turn. The other two Stingers were circling above the canyon entrance, unable to enter but unwilling to let their prey escape. They would wait him out, call for ground troops. Kale scanned his limited tactical display. There was an old access tunnel for a depleted mine about a kilometer ahead. It was their only chance. He pushed the battered mule forward. The engine coughed, a plume of black smoke erupting from the exhaust. The plasma hit from earlier had damaged a fuel line. He could smell it, a dangerous, volatile scent. They were losing power. The truck slowed, its mighty roar diminishing to a strained wheeze. "Come on, you old beast," Kale urged, his hands gripping the wheel. "Not here. Not now." The truck rolled to a stop, the engine finally dying with a shudder. Silence descended, broken only by the distant whine of the Stinger engines. They were trapped. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. The mental pressure was there again, but this time it was a question. It was a sense of trust. He looked from her to the dead controls of his truck. For 10 years, he had relied on no one but himself and the machine he had built. Now, both had failed him, but he was not alone. "The fuel line is ruptured," he said, speaking aloud for the first time. "I have to get out and patch it. They'll see me." She seemed to understand. She slid out of her seat and moved to the back of the cab. Her hands pressed against the rear window. Kale watched, fascinated, as the silicate dust and crystal fragments on the ground behind the truck began to swirl. They lifted into the air, coalescing into a dense, shimmering cloud that completely obscured the mule from view. It was not a wall of solid crystal, but a localized storm of razor-sharp particles, a perfect camouflage that would blind any visual or thermal sensors. Kale grabbed his toolkit and a sealant patch from under his seat. He slipped out of the driver's side door, his boots crunching softly on the crystalline ground. He was completely hidden within the swirling vortex of dust. He worked quickly, his hands sure and practiced as he located the ruptured line. The metal was hot, and the fumes made his head spin, but he ignored the discomfort. He applied the emergency sealant, a thick, black paste that hardened on contact, clamping it securely in place. As he worked, he could hear the Stingers growing impatient, firing probing shots into the canyon that ricocheted with high-pitched whines. He felt the ground tremble each time a shot impacted nearby. But inside the shimmering cloud, he was safe. Lyra was protecting him. He finished the patch, his heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and something else, something akin to gratitude. He climbed back into the cab, his hands stained with grease and fuel. Lyra was still, her hands pressed to the glass, the effort of maintaining the storm clearly taxing her. The light in her chest was now a bare flicker, a candle in the wind. "It's done," he said. He turned the ignition key. The engine sputtered, caught, and then roared back to life, louder and angrier than before. The dust storm outside dissipated as Lyra lowered her hands, her body slumping back into the seat. The path ahead was clear. Cale engaged the gears, and the iron mule surged forward, leaving the confused Stinger pilots circling an empty patch of canyon. They had survived, together. The bond between the jaded veteran and the silent crystal being was no longer one of mere convenience. It had been forged in fire and sealed with trust. Their journey took them deeper into the shatter, a landscape that grew more hostile and alien with every kilometer. Jagged spires of obsidian clawed at the sky, and the ground was a treacherous mosaic of razor-sharp crystal plates. The twin suns beat down relentlessly, creating heat shimmers that made the world dance and warp. Pursuers were a constant threat, their distant engine whines a reminder that they were not forgotten. This shared ordeal became the crucible of their partnership. They developed a nonverbal language. A slight incline of Lyra's head indicated a safe path, her connection to the planet allowing her to sense geological instabilities Cale could not see. A tap on the dashboard from Cale was a signal to prepare for a hard turn or a sudden stop. He learned to read the shifting intensity of the light in her chest. A steady glow meant she was calm and strong. A fluctuating flicker indicated fatigue or danger. Days bled into one another, measured not by the sun's cycles, but by fuel consumption and the dwindling supply of rations. During one long halt, as Cale worked to reinforce a damaged axle on the mule, Lyra sat on a nearby rock outcropping, seeming to draw strength from the planet itself. He noticed the damage to her own body more clearly now. The cracks from the mining lasers were still visible, a network of fine lines marring the smooth perfection of her crystalline skin. They were scars, no different from the ones that crisscrossed his own back and arms from his enforcer days. As the second sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows, she approached him. She pointed a slender finger at a thick, jagged scar on his forearm, a memento from a plasma burn in the corporate wars on Cygnus X-1. Then, she touched one of the larger cracks on her own shoulder. The meaning was unmistakable. "We are both damaged. We have both known pain." Cale felt a barrier within himself crumble. He had never spoken of his past to anyone. He had buried the man he used to be under a mountain of cynicism and silence. But in this quiet moment, with this silent alien being, he felt a flicker of connection, a shared understanding that transcended words and species. He reached out and gently traced the fracture on her shoulder, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against the cool, smooth surface. She did not flinch. The light within her pulsed, a soft, warm glow. Later that night, as they took shelter in a shallow cave, the truth was revealed. Lyra placed her hand on his forehead as he lay in a state of exhausted half-sleep. His mind filled with a torrent of visions, clearer and more coherent than any he had experienced before. He saw Xylos not as a barren rock, but as a vibrant, living world, covered in crystalline forests that sang with a silent, harmonic energy. He saw her people, the geodes, not as individuals, but as countless facets of a single, planetary consciousness. They were the planet's mind, its memory, its soul. He saw the arrival of the Xylos Corporation. He saw the first drills as a violation, a piercing shriek of pain that echoed through the entire collective. He saw the geodes being ripped from the ground, their connection to the whole severed, their consciousness fading into inert, silent crystal. The corporation's mining was not just resource extraction, it was a lobotomy, a slow, agonizing murder of a sentient world. The vision sharpened, focusing on a single, titanic piece of machinery at the heart of the corporation's operations, the planet Cracker. It was a drill of obscene proportions, designed to bore directly into the planet's core to tap its geothermal energy. He saw what the corporation did not know, or did not care to know. At the core was the Heartstone, the central nexus of the geode consciousness. If the drill reached it, the planet would not just die. It would be unmade, its consciousness extinguished forever. The vision faded, leaving Kale breathless and sweating, the cold reality of their situation settling upon him like a shroud. This was not a fight for his own survival anymore. It was not even a fight for Lyra's. It was a fight for the life of a world. The corporation, in its blind greed, had become a planetary plague. Voss and Rorik were not just corporate tyrants. They were the architects of a genocide. For the first time in a decade, Kale felt the stirrings of a cause, a purpose beyond simply drawing his next breath. He was a reclaimer, a hauler of slag. But perhaps his true purpose was to help this world reclaim itself. The revelation gave him a new, grim sense of resolve. He now had a destination, the planet Cracker. Destroying it was the only thing that mattered. Their journey became a race against time. The visions had shown Kale that the drill was nearing its final depth. They pushed the iron mule to its breaking point, navigating treacherous terrain with a desperate urgency. But the corporation was closing in. Rorik, driven by a personal vendetta against the enforcer who had gone rogue, seemed to anticipate their every move. He was no longer just following orders. This was a hunt. They were crossing a wide, dried-up basin when the attack came. It was not a small patrol of skimmers. It was a full-scale assault force. Heavy gunships descended from the bruised purple sky, escorted by squadrons of stingers. On the ground, armored hover tanks fanned out, their cannons already targeting the lone, battered truck. At their head was Rorik's command skimmer, sleek and black, a predator leading its pack. Nowhere left to hide. Kale, Rorik's voice boomed over an open broadcast, dripping with malice. Director Voss wants the asset intact. He was less specific about you. Surrender the geode, and I might grant you a quick death. Kale didn't bother to reply. He scanned the terrain. They were caught in the open, a perfect kill zone. Get ready, he said to Lyra, his voice low and steady. The battle was short and brutal. Lyra erected massive shields of crystal, but the sustained fire from the tanks began to shatter them as quickly as she could raise them. Kale swerved and weaved, using the mule's surprising durability to weather glancing blows that would have vaporized a lesser vehicle. He used the truck's magnetic grapple, a tool for hauling slag, as a weapon, firing it at a tank and using its own momentum to swing it into another. But it was not enough. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. A missile exploded just ahead of them, flipping the iron mule onto its side. Kale was thrown against the door, his head striking the window frame. Stars exploded behind his eyes. The world spun, and the roar of battle faded to a dull ringing in his ears. He came to, coughing, the cab filled with smoke. Lyra was shielding him with her own body, her crystalline form absorbing the heat from a fire that had started in the engine block. Outside, the corporate forces were closing in, their methodical advance that of an execution squad. He saw Rorik's skimmer land, the man himself stepping out, a plasma rifle in his hands, a cruel smirk on his face. This was it. They had lost. A direct military victory was impossible. The corporation's power was absolute, their resources endless. They could fight and run, but they could not win. The conflict threatened to consume them, and with them, the last hope for Xylos. As Rorik approached, Lyra pressed her hand to Kale's temple one last time. A final, desperate vision flooded his mind. It was not a memory of the past, but a glimpse of a possible future, a solution. He saw the Heartstone again, deep beneath the planet Cracker. He saw Lyra standing before it, her body dissolving into pure light and energy as she merged with it. He saw a wave of harmonic resonance expand from the core, a silent scream that was perfectly tuned to disrupt corporate technology. He saw every engine, every weapon, every computer on the planet go dead. It was a way to win, a way to end the war in a single, decisive act. But the vision continued, and he saw the terrible price. Lyra's individual consciousness would be gone, subsumed back into the planet. It was an act of ultimate self-sacrifice. Then, the vision showed him a final, horrifying detail. The planet Cracker's drill had damaged the primary energy conduits that surrounded the Heartstone, misaligning them. For Lyra's energy to be channeled correctly, the conduits had to be held in their precise configuration manually. The surge of planetary energy would be immense, an uncontainable torrent of raw power. Anything holding the conduits in place would be integrated. Not just killed, but fused into the system, becoming a permanent, living part of the planetary network. A living seal. A prisoner in stone for eternity. The impossible choice was presented. To save the world, Lyra had to sacrifice her identity. And to allow her to do that, someone else had to make an even greater sacrifice, giving up not just their life, but their very humanity, their freedom to even die. The vision ended. Cale looked past Rorik's approaching figure, towards the distant, monolithic shape of the planet Cracker on the horizon. He knew what he had to do. Cale lay in the wreckage of the mule's cab, the world a haze of pain and smoke. Rorik's boots crunched on the crystal ground outside, each step a nail in his coffin. The final conflict, however, was not with the man in black armor. It was an internal war, waged in the silent seconds between breaths. His entire life had been a masterclass in self-preservation. He had survived the corporate wars, survived the enforcers, survived a decade of scraping by on the fringes of the galaxy. Survival was his religion, its first and only commandment. Look out for yourself. Now he was being asked to cast that religion aside, to not only die, but to become a living monument to a cause he had not even known existed a few days ago. To sacrifice his life, his freedom, his very identity, for a silent crystal alien and the soul of a planet he had only ever seen as a paycheck. It was an insane proposition, a fool's bargain. He looked at Lyra. She was crouched over him, the light in her chest a weak, desperate pulse. She had shielded him from the fire, protected him with her own body. She had saved him time and again, asking nothing in return. She was willing to dissolve her own being to save her world. How could he do any less? The man he was, the cynical, solitary reclaimer, would have laughed at the thought. He would have tried to bargain, to find another way, to save his own skin. But that man was already gone. He had died somewhere back in the canyons, in a moment of shared understanding over old scars, in the quiet trust of a blinding dust storm. The man who remained was someone else, someone who had been given a reason to fight for something more than just the next sunrise. He thought of the world Lyra had shown him, the singing forests of crystal, the vibrant, unified consciousness. It was a world that deserved to exist. It was a world worth dying for. Rorik ripped the twisted door off the cab. "End of the line, Cale," he sneered, raising his rifle. In that moment, Cale made his choice. With a surge of adrenaline, he kicked out with his good leg, striking the rifle and sending the shot wide. Simultaneously, Lyra moved. She did not attack Rorik. Instead, she slammed her hand onto the ground. The earth beneath the corporate troops erupted. It was not an attack, but a massive geological shift. A deep chasm opened up, separating them from the wrecked truck. The ground pitched and rolled, throwing tanks and soldiers into chaos. It was a diversion, a desperate, costly gambit that left her visibly drained, her form flickering like a dying hologram. "Go," Cale croaked, pulling himself from the wreckage. To the drill. He did not need to explain. She understood. She helped him to his feet, her strength supporting his weight. They left the Iron Mule, their fallen fortress, and began the long, stumbling journey towards the planet Cracker, leaving Rorik and his forces scrambling to recover from the localized earthquake. The acceptance of his fate settled upon him during that long walk. The rage and the fear bled away, replaced by a profound and solemn calm. This was not a defeat. It was a purpose. Every step was an agony, his injuries screaming in protest, but he pushed on, driven by the image of the Heartstone and the sacrifice that was to come. They found a small, hidden fissure in the rock, a place to rest for a few precious hours before the final push. The cacophony of the distant, regrouping corporate forces was a constant reminder that their time was short. Cale sat with his back against the cool stone, cleaning his sidearm with methodical, practiced motions. It was a ritual, a way of focusing his mind. Lyra sat opposite him, her inner light so faint he could barely see it. She had expended almost all of her energy in the diversion. She was saving what little she had left for the Heartstone. He finished cleaning the weapon, checked the power cell, and holstered it. He looked at her, his decision absolute. He had to communicate it, to make sure she understood. Words were useless. He reached out and placed his palm against the cave wall, mimicking the way she communed with the planet. He closed his eyes and focused, not on the stone, but on the vision she had given him. He pictured the misaligned conduits. He pictured a figure, his figure, stepping forward to grasp them. He pictured himself holding them in place as the wave of energy erupted, pictured his body turning to crystal, becoming the eternal seal. He poured his acceptance, his resolve, his final, unwavering commitment into that mental image. He was not afraid. He opened his eyes. Lyra was looking at him, her featureless face somehow conveying an expression of immense sorrow and profound respect. She reached across the small space between them and placed her crystalline fingers over his hand on the cave wall. A single, pure, bell-like tone echoed in his mind. It was a sound of gratitude, a sound of farewell. The pact was sealed. Their final journey was a descent into the maw of the beast. They used service tunnels and ventilation shafts, Kale's old enforcer knowledge of corporate facility layouts proving invaluable. They moved like ghosts through the guts of the Planet Cracker facility, the thunderous, grinding roar of the drill a constant, deafening presence that covered their movements. The final chamber was a vast, cathedral-like cavern at the bottom of the mine, dominated by the colossal, rotating head of the drill. At its center, exposed by the excavation, was the Heartstone. It was a flawless, gigantic crystal that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, the lifeblood of Xylos laid bare and vulnerable. Surrounding it were the conduits Kale had seen in his vision, massive coiling cables of metal and crystal, sparking erratically where the drill had damaged their housing. Corporate technicians and armed guards swarmed the area, making final preparations for the drill to breach the core. But their attention was on their instruments, not on the shadows. Kale and Lyra slipped through the gantries and machinery, making their way towards the central platform. They were almost there when a voice cut through the din. "I should have known you'd come here." Rorik stood on the gantry above them, his plasma rifle aimed squarely at Kale's chest. He was alone, his face a mask of obsessive hatred. He had abandoned his command to seek this personal confrontation. "It's over, Kale. The director is watching from orbit. He wants to see this planet crack. And I want to see you die." Kale pushed Lyra behind him. "Go," he whispered. "Get to the stone. I'll handle him." She hesitated for only a second, then flowed past him, a silent shadow moving towards the heart of the room. Rorik fired, but Kale was already moving, diving behind a power generator. The bolt of plasma hissed past, melting a crater in the steel floor. What followed was a brutal, desperate fight amidst the cacophony of the dying world. Kale used the environment, his knowledge of industrial machinery his only advantage against Rorik's superior weaponry. He ducked behind pistons, climbed service ladders, and used the drill's own deafening noise to mask his movements. It was a battle of a ghost against a hunter, a throwback to the dirty wars Kale had fought long ago. He managed to get above Rorik, dropping down onto the gantry behind him. They grappled, hand to hand, a frantic struggle of two men defined by the same violent system. Rorik was stronger, but Kale was more desperate. He saw Lyra reach the platform, her hand outstretched towards the Heartstone. Time was running out. With a final, desperate heave, Kale broke Rorik's grip and shoved him towards the edge of the gantry. Rorik stumbled, his arms windmilling, and fell over the railing, his scream swallowed by the roar of the drill as he plunged into the grinding machinery below. Kale didn't watch him fall. He was already stumbling towards the central platform, his body a canvas of pain. He reached the Heartstone just as Lyra placed her hand upon it. The chamber filled with an ethereal hum. The light from the stone intensified, bathing everything in a soft, white glow. "Now," Kale gasped, his voice raw. He turned to the sparking, misaligned conduits. They were massive, as thick as his torso, pulsing with raw, untamed energy. Taking a deep, ragged breath, he stepped between them. He grabbed one in each hand. The pain was absolute. It was not a burn or a shock, but a feeling of being unmade, his atoms torn apart and reassembled. 1 billion volts of the planet's life force surged through him. His vision exploded into white light. He saw everything. He saw the birth of Xylos in a cloud of stellar dust. He saw the first crystals form, the first stirrings of the collective consciousness. He saw the singing forests, the silent harmony of the geodes. He saw Lyra's own birth, a new facet in the ancient whole. His body seized, his muscles locking as he held the conduits in their perfect alignment. He could feel his flesh hardening, his blood turning to liquid crystal. The transformation was agonizing, but in the heart of the pain, there was peace. He was no longer just Kale. He was becoming a part of the song. Through the torrent of energy, he felt Lyra. Her consciousness flowed into the Heartstone, and from there, into him. It was a final, silent thank you. A promise that his sacrifice would not be in vain. Then, the wave erupted. A silent, invisible pulse of pure harmonic resonance shot out from the Heartstone, with Kale as its focusing lens. It swept through the facility, across the surface of Xylos, and into the sky above. Every corporate machine went dead. The planet Cracker's colossal drill ground to a halt with a final, soul-shaking groan of tortured metal. The lights in the chamber died. The weapons in the guards' hands became inert blocks of plastic and steel. On the orbital platform above, Director Voss watched his command screens go black, his fleet of warships suddenly nothing more than powerless, floating coffins. Silence descended upon Xylos. A profound, peaceful silence that was the antithesis of the drill's violent roar. The war was over. In the center of the chamber, where a man named Kale had once stood, there was now a statue of dark, smoky crystal, its arms outstretched, forever holding the conduits of life in place. A faint, steady light pulsed within its chest, in perfect time with the gentle thrum of the living planet. 10 years passed. The silence that had fallen upon the planet Cracker had spread across all of Xylos. The corporation, its infrastructure crippled and its fleet disabled, had abandoned the world, writing it off as a catastrophic loss. The scars of their mining operations remained, but they were softening, their sharp edges slowly being smoothed over by time and the planet's patient, crystalline touch. A new settlement had taken root in the shadow of the old corporate headquarters. It was called Kale's Rest. It was not a town of prospectors or corporate drones, but of refugees, scientists, and pioneers who had heard the story and come seeking a different way of life. They lived in structures grown from the planet's own crystal, in harmony with the world that had been so nearly destroyed. They did not drill or mine. They listened. The planet was healing. The glass sea was receding, and in its place, nascent crystalline forests were rising, their fractal branches catching the light of the twin suns. The air was cleaner, and sometimes, on the wind, one could hear a faint, harmonic hum, the song of the waking world. Lyra was no longer a distinct entity, but her consciousness was everywhere. She was the wind, the stone, the light. She was the soul of Xylos, whole and free. A young woman, born in the first year of the settlement, made the pilgrimage to the heart of the silent drill. It was a rite of passage for the children of Kale's Rest, a journey to the sacred place where the world had been saved. She walked through the quiet, cathedral-like chamber, her soft footsteps the only sound. She stood before the central platform, gazing up at the memorial. It was not something they had built. It was something that had been made. A figure of dark, smoky crystal stood fused to the massive conduits that surrounded the now brilliant Heartstone. The figure was unmistakably human in form, its posture one of eternal, unwavering resolve. A soft, warm light pulsed within its chest, a steady beat that was the rhythm of the planet itself. The woman reached out and gently touched the statue's crystalline leg. A sense of profound peace washed over her, a feeling of gratitude so deep it was almost overwhelming. She felt the history of the place, not as a story told, but as a living memory held within the stone. She felt the pain, the desperation, the battle, and finally, the sacrifice. She felt the quiet courage of the man who had given everything, not for glory or wealth, but for the life of a world that was not his own. He was remembered not as a warrior, but as a guardian, the reclaimer who had become the restorer. His name was a legend, a quiet prayer spoken by those who now lived in the peace he had bought. He had traded his life and his humanity for a future he would never see, becoming a silent, eternal watcher at the heart of a world reborn. His sacrifice was not forgotten. It was the foundation upon which their new world was built. The man was gone, but his purpose endured, a silent, shining beacon in the deep, quiet heart of Xylos.